Hello, welcome to another episode of Afterlife. I'm Samina Bari, and today I want to talk about an issue that we could frankly spend more than one episode on, and it's the impact of grief, specifically losing a parent, to the lives of young children. As you know, my children were just 7 years old when my husband suddenly died, and I have really since that time devoted my entire being to make sure that they grow up as well adjusted as they possibly can, given the trauma and the loss that's this significant. So today, joining me, I'm really delighted to have a very special guest. Joining me is Cara Belvin. She is the CEO and founder of an amazing nonprofit group that is aimed to guide children who have lost their parent, and it's called Empower. Cara, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me. I sincerely appreciate this.
And Cara has been featured on many national talk shows. She's quite an expert in this area. So I wanted to start off with just kind of a simple question. What really inspired you to found Empower, and what did you hope to address within this community?
Well, the purpose in, forming a nonprofit organization in my case was really just to build community for girls like me initially, now all kids who've lost a parent. My mom was 37 years old when she died of breast cancer, and I was 9. My brother was 13. And growing up with an army of family and friends to support my dad and my brother and I will tell you, I may as well have lived on planet Mars for 10 years, never having really met another girl like me or child in, my small world, my small town in suburban Connecticut who could relate to my loss. And so that's very isolating. I didn't learn many tools, and I hold no ill will for that, but I didn't have many tools to talk about just how sad I was, eventually how mad I was. I also grew up at a time, and unfortunately, not a lot has changed for some grieving children around this country. But I grew up at a time when a lot of people would whisper behind my back. And I heard those whispers. I didn't have a lot of opportunity to talk to a teacher or another, if they say it takes a village, there weren't a lot of people in my village who were comfortable talking about the death of my mother. And therefore, I think I learned rules that said, like, you're not allowed to talk about this here. And I know that came from love. I think a lot of people saw that my brother and I were doing great, and we were straight A students, and we were college bound. And that signaled that, we were okay, that the loss happened for sure, but it was a while ago, and I think the kids are good. And so what really inspired me initially was just about 10 years ago, my babysitter, an incredible young teenage girl. She had just lost her mom. And that was the first time in decades I'd ever really been present or held space with a girl whose mother died and who I'd have to now watch grieve. And it brought me to my knees. And what it did, it inspired me and mobilized me to start a nonprofit and build community for girls like her, and used everything I knew about my childhood growing up and everything I knew about my father's experience, a 37-year-old grieving dad, watching his children grieve, which is an unbearable experience, as I would imagine. And I really built programs. I built events, an event model that could bring kids together throughout the year, that were non-therapeutic, that were community-based, that were volunteer-driven. And secondly, I built a mentor program, now the only mentor program in the world for kids in grief, where we could make mirror matches and match a bereaved child with an adult like me who survived the loss of a parent.
That's just beautiful. And I think, you said that it came from a place of love, that people watched you and thought you were okay. But, I posit a little bit that, yes, it is love, but there's also this level of discomfort because so many adults are afraid of talking about the passing of a parent to a child. And I think just, as a society, we're so ill-equipped with it. There's so much discomfort and, just a lack of understanding what to say because, quite honestly,
Yes.
there aren't the right words. And people are sometimes afraid of saying the wrong thing or sometimes not. So they tend to not say anything at all. They watch from
Correct.
afar and hope for the best.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And I can't tell you, I want to say that so many adults in my kids' life and told me, oh, they'll be okay. Children are resilient.
Mm-hmm.
And, what I have to say is I see your response.
Yeah.
I wince at that too, because I want to tell everybody listening and viewing that children are not resilient. Children who have faced trauma and grief are not resilient. Yes. It is simply something that adults who have not experienced this say to make themselves feel better. But it is not true. It takes takes a lot of effort to help guide a young person through their grief and process that, right? Because they don't have the capacity or maturity to understand what they're feeling and to work through it on their own.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I want to say, and I should have started by saying, I'm really sorry for your loss. And
Thank
people
you.
would say, a grief expert might say, well, we can't say it like that. What are you sorry for? Or look, I give everyone a free pass in this instance. I think the death of a young parent in a community makes us all uncomfortable at our core. So I give the community a free pass, or the village, or the teachers, or the friends' parents, or because I'm not an expert in it, I still get it wrong. But my advice to anyone who knows and loves a child of parent loss, that you simply say something or you simply do something, because if it comes from a place of love, you can't say or do the wrong thing. So when I use the example that my brother and I really did hear the whispers behind my back, and why it was worse was simply because that was what further isolated me. I already knew I was different from my peers. I was acutely aware in August, when everyone was going back to school shopping with their mothers, I was missing her, but I was also angry that I didn't have that and that she lost out on that. So that there is such an array of emotions. And had I, in this instance, this isn't just a plug for the nonprofit I started, but had I had a mentor, someone who was outside my family nucleus, someone who was an adult who survived the loss of, their mother or father, who could kind of pull me aside and say, I know a little bit about what it is to be you, and you're going to survive this. It's going to get better. It's going to. That would have almost taken the pressure off my father, the surviving guardian, because I look back at my father and I think it wasn't in his job description to teach me how to grieve. It was in his job description to love me, and that's what he did. He loved me fiercely, was very overprotective of my brother and I. He missed my mother. He did an incredible thing. He did an incredible job raising us. And my mother was sick and knew she was dying, and I know that he did all that she had asked and more. But what an extraordinary experience for him as a young man. So I'll never judge him for the way that he responded to the death of my mother. But I will say to a community, like, let's help out that surviving guardian. Let's help bring in more supports and find ways to really help that child grieve, and grieve at the time of loss, not 10 years later, which is really the story that I tell about my brother and I. I don't think we grieved my mother's death. I think we were pretty much on autopilot for a good decade, and then kind of woke up one day and said, oh my God, mom died. Like, because there wasn't a space for us to really grieve openly.
So that's really interesting. And it sounds like, it kind of hit you at some point as a young adult. So did you just stifle your feelings and not talk about it because you didn't have the support system in place? And, you said you and your brother were straight A students, so you turned out just great. But
Sure.
that's not always the case with children who have lost a parent. The statistics are so high that children who experience
Yes.
loss of a parent at a young age wind up with issues of addiction and depression and anxiety, and just terrible outcomes. What do you think you did? What were you armed with, maybe that your father gave you, or that you found in yourself to not fall backwards, but to move ahead?
First I'll say, we joke a lot at Empower. We say, define fine. Like, I did turn out fine, but there was a great deal of pain and there was a great deal of sadness. And that was like a tattoo. I mean, it's not going anywhere, but it will fade. But that pain in those initial years following the death of my mother were so immense, and they were crippling. But yes, I put one foot in front of the other. I always say, I went to school, I did my homework, I played sports, I, sat with the cool kids at lunch, and those things made life a little bit easier. But for the 6 million grieving children across America, they are carrying like a 1-ton brick on their chest if support is not provided. So my goal is support should be provided. And whatever that support looks like, I think it should be everything. I think it should be therapeutic support. I think some parents will tell me, everyone's telling me that I have to bring her to therapy or I have to bring him to therapy, but he's going kicking and screaming. And it's not, the stars aren't aligned, and therapeutic support today. So let's try something else, like caring community, peer support. Peer support can be really impactful for a child who can look around the room and realize they're not alone in their grief. There are other children powering through, going to school, doing their homework, playing a sport, practicing violin, whatever it is they're doing. These are kids who are being asked to keep up with a world going on around them as normal when nothing is normal in your world after your parent dies. So I think for me, I'll say the greatest gift I received in grief was empathy. So I think that I had an empathetic spirit, and I know I got that from my mother and from my father. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was, certain supports that I found on my own, and I built my own community as I got older, and I was seeking out other women of mother loss. And that for me was healing, more healing than anything I've ever done. Being in service was more healing than anything I've ever done. But I would tell you that it took an incredible amount of strength for my brother and I to really, as I said, keep up with the world going on around us as normal. And there were certain pressures that served me well, but I think those pressures don't serve a lot of children well, and they can be very damaging. But that pressure to, for me, live my mother's legacy. My mother was, she was angelic, and she was beautiful and smart and funny and a girl's girl and hardworking. So maybe that's where that's what maybe kept me going, was living her legacy or living a life for two. And maybe it was to honor my father, and maybe it was to ensure that my father didn't have any added stress. But that pressure served me well, maybe, but that's a lot of pressure on a child to, tell the community we're doing great, which in turn shows you my father's doing great. So there were a lot of pressures that I think at different times could be really damaging, but for me and my brother probably served us well for a bit. I will tell you, it all kind of comes crashing down after a bit of time. If a child is not provided supports or not provided tools and resources, I think, unfortunately, there's probably a time of real pain and real terrible aftermath. And so I found a way to do something about it. I always say that, the work that we do at Empower and this mentor program that I built was simply something I could do. It wasn't bringing anyone back, and it wasn't taking away a lot of that pain or heartache, but it was doing something in the world of childhood bereavement. And, as I always say, I'll shout it from the rooftops. I think it's a national public health crisis, childhood bereavement. And you're right. The research says that children do better when the parent is doing better, the surviving parent. But for a surviving parent, they're very overwhelmed. My father was very overwhelmed with keeping up.
Yeah, I can tell you, from my experience, my emotional burden is crushing. And there are days that I can power through, and then it's like I've used up all of my energy reserves. And then I still 2.5 years later, it just comes crashing down, because a parent is only as well as their children are. And when you are going through this type of a loss, your sole focus is to make sure your children are okay. And you mentioned pressures, and some are detrimental pressures. At the time my husband died, my children went to a Christian academy. It was really very interesting because we are not a religious family, but, we were sending our kids there for structure. And what happened was, they would talk in class about heaven being a reward, and where you go in the afterlife, if you are good, is you go to heaven. And what that did to my 7-year-olds, in my 7-year-olds thinking, was my children came home and they said they wanted to die as children so they could go to heaven to be with their daddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I cannot tell you the fear, the angst that it put in me, thinking my children were thinking of dying. And I had to have a very firm conversation with the school to watch what they say and to understand the role and the explanation of religion in the context of death. My children happened to be the only children in that school who had lost a parent. And that was a kindergarten through 12 school.
Yes.
And so they really were alone. In their attempt for empathy, they started off a daily prayer for the class. And in the prayer every day, they prayed for my husband, they prayed for my girls, and they prayed for me. And what they didn't realize was every single day, they were reminding my children of their loss.
Yeah.
I think from a cultural, religious sensitivity standpoint, you have to be so careful what you say to children and even to adults. If you're a person of faith, that's fantastic. But if you don't know about the person, don't try to explain it away by using religious context. because it lands the wrong way. And in some ways, it's harmful. It's detrimental, as it was to my children. I immediately had the added burden of having to remove my children from that school because they also, in addition to that, what they weren't understanding was children grieve differently. Children don't have the emotional maturity or the words to explain what they're feeling. So what comes out as what seems to be bad behavior or anger, temper tantrums, crying jags, that's not a bad child. That's a child in grief and trauma.
Yes.
They just
Yes.
don't have the tools. And that's something I try to explain to everyone who's meeting my children. I almost say
Yes.
I have an apology before I meet them and tell them that, my children are actually really good children,
Yep.
but there are certain triggers that are unseen and unknown at the moment.
Yes.
And it may result in some behavior that they don't think is polite, but know that it's not intentional.
And I think there's a lot of misconceptions too. I think a lot of us in the community or in the schools or extended family even, we want kids to be good after 2 years. We want everyone to be kind of over it. And that sentiment can incite rage in a child, right?
Absolutely.
And so I'll say I've met the most extraordinary families, thousands of families over the years since doing this, committing my life to this work. And again, I always say I give a free pass to the surviving parent because I don't even know what it is to be them. And so I don't try to know that. I'm an expert in my story. I can tell you everything it is to be a 9-year-old girl whose mother died of breast cancer after a 2-year battle in a small town where I was the only girl in the world whose mother died, who watched her father grieve, but who was grateful for support and love that I needed. And I thrived in that. However, I will tell you that I think as a community, we all wanted me and my brother to be fine. And we do that because out of love, we don't want to watch a child grieve. And we don't want to attribute a bad behavior or a bad grade on a test, to the death of my mother. But the truth is, societal norms, whatever it was that influenced us, I felt enraged at certain points because no one let me tell my story. But I think the part of the whispers behind my back were, well, Cara is a straight A student because her mother died. Classic overachiever because her mother died. If I was not performing well in school, it was because my mother died. If I had a boyfriend and wanted a boyfriend, it was because I was needy because my mother died. If I avoided relationships, as I was an adolescent and young adult, if I was avoiding a relationship, it was because I was afraid of abandonment because my mother died. And that incites rage when someone else continues to tell your story. And so why I say kids need it all. Kids need a mentor to empower. They need events that build peer support. They need therapy. They need tools. They need loving support from neighbors. It's because it is such a complex issue to lose a parent when you're young. And the child is also watching their parent grieve. And that's unbearable. And that's, we know that as the surviving parent, you've already been through enough. Now to be part of some of the snowball effect is very painful for us, to watch a parent. So I guess in a lot of ways, it's the, weight of the world that the child really has. But again, we can fool a lot of people around to thinking, that was a long time ago. That loss is behind me and I've moved on. I've moved forward through it. When the truth is, kids are really always thinking about the loss.
Absolutely.
It's constant.
It's always
reminders.
there. Yeah. I mean, I think, and when you have a child and or children and a parent grieving, you mirror each other's grief. It almost makes it, harder to get through either person's grief because it's almost like it's bouncing off of the whole family at the same time, and it might ebb and flow, but it's always there. That weight is always there. And I'm sure your dad raised you with love and was woeful and wistful that his wife, your mom, didn't get to see all those proud moments. As you were hurting, he was hurting for the same exact reason. My kids went to school yesterday for the first time, and it was tough on all of us for the same exact reason, because it was a reminder that it was another year, and it would be yet another year for the rest of their lives without their dad seeing him. And I had, the same emotional reaction. It was tough on me too. to have to do that. It's a hard thing in the family. And I think I completely agree with you. My children have been in therapy, grief therapy, since it happened. We have found, you're on the East Coast, we're on the West Coast. We found a nonprofit organization that offers a children's peer group. And my children love it because they say they feel like they're not alone. They feel like they're comfortable and they're with children who really get them.
Yes. And, we all know that, as young people, we really don't want to be different. We don't want to be seen as different from our peers, but losing a parent really makes you pretty different. I mean, there are few things that compare to that. And, I think that's a life-changing experience to meet other kids who are also powering through, understanding your story is not my story. And it's not just about the type of loss or the time of loss. It's just that we're all in this together. Young people who lose a parent, I always say, it's out of sequence. That's not natural, right? And what I learned as I went about my life, I thankfully never had this envy or jealousy of my girlfriends who, especially during adolescence, were fighting with their mother and yelling at their mother. I didn't feel this sense of, if you only knew what it felt like to be me and having lost my mother, you would treat her. I never felt that. Not any part of my being felt that. I had empathy because I understood that my loss was out of sequence. The pain I felt was so out of sequence and at such a young age. But I knew as I went about my life and my world would open up, I would meet other women in particular who knew adversity. And it proved to be true. As I got older and I started to draw strength from other women, maybe who didn't have a personal tie to my cause, a personal tie to my loss, they knew other great pain or suffering. And you draw strengths from each other. But that's why peer support is really so important. Kids don't want to feel different, but it's undeniable. Losing a parent young makes you very, very different. And feeling different and feeling alone or isolated can have, grave consequences, as we know.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me a little, my children are fortunate in that they have found this group and it's been really so important to them. And one of my children wants to continue doing it. And they have an overnight camp and it's bittersweet. It's beautiful. It's heartbreaking that all of the junior counselors are people who've also experienced loss. So they do feel like they've got some fears. Tell us more about your group and kind of how far it reaches and how you can get involved. Because I really love that model. And I wish more people were part of that, because you're right. Having an adult who understands and who can be your special friend will make a world of difference to young children.
Our mentor program, I didn't know it at the time, really. I mean, I really kept my head down, as any founder will tell you. You really keep your head down and you keep grinding and grinding. I mean, I had more conviction for this cause than anything I'd ever done. And I started Empower. It was called Empower Her. It was just simply for girls who lost their mother. And my simple idea was to bring those girls together on Mother's Day for a sleepaway. And we would do yoga and meditation and arts and crafts and hair and makeup. And, it was sort of packaged up in a bow. It was non-therapeutic. We didn't have psychologists. And I started my career as a psychologist. I didn't have clinicians running the groups. I had lay people. And the lay people were women like me who had loss. And so we intentionally weren't grief experts or social workers. What we were trying to say is, in our real life, this is real life. You still have to get up the next day, go to school. You have expectations. There's a beautiful world still at your fingertips. And I knew back then that's what their mother wants for them. And so I felt, I can do this as much for this child as I could do for their mother. I'm a mother, and that took on a whole new meaning when I became a mom and realized what my mother experienced and that great loss. But after having these events and building peer support for a couple of years, I realized the girls could really benefit from something more, something year-round, something really, truly community-based. Because I didn't grieve just on a Tuesday, in a therapy session. I didn't really grieve in school, with a school psychologist and then go take a math test, that I inevitably probably wouldn't perform very well on. Not to say that schools should be a place where we deny someone's grief, but school-based or center-based, I didn't think was what I was really looking for. I was looking for someone in my world who would recognize I was grieving on Tuesday, I was grieving at the prom, I was grieving on the beach, and having a mentor meant that was a special friend who I could call on or almost put in my back pocket so that I could lean on them or draw strength from them. I could learn, historically, they could tell me that milestones like graduating high school were hard without their mother. And that's what I was preparing myself for. Or, thinking about other major milestones like, becoming a mom myself. Like, what would that be like? I can't do that without a mom. Then, talk to a 40-year-old woman who says, yeah, becoming a mom myself was beautiful. It was hard. I missed my mom again. I re-grieved again. And that's honest. It's not, I can't lie about that. But having a mentor would have been someone that could have supported the whole family. And we say we support the whole child. A grieving child, it does take a village. And so our mentors have relationships with everyone in the family, surviving guardian, extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, best friends, mom's best friend, dad's best friend who passed away, and is a forever friend, someone that actually can, teach loss that's survivable. Because when my mother died, I was 9. Even when I was 12 or 14 or 18 years old, I could not have been convinced that I was going to survive this. I mean, it was like a 1-ton brick on my chest. I looked the part, but I was in a great deal of pain. I just didn't see any way out of this sadness. And so I think that's, a mentor for me would have been life-changing. And it's life-changing for the kids in our program. So we started it here in Boston and grew very fast and exponentially throughout, New England. And then ultimately expanded to 10 cities around the country where I had already ambassadorship. I had a foothold, and we were able to make mentor matches in additional cities. We're also active in London, in the UK. And I'd say, after 10 years, that's as far as we've got. I mean, but it's a program that should be offered to children anywhere. And that pains me knowing, there's a girl or a boy grieving, silently, as we talk about, and researchers will comment that we're still silent grievers today. My mother died 40 years ago, but not a lot has changed in the world of childhood bereavement over these last 40 years to make sure that kids have the tools they need to really grieve.
I mentioned that yesterday was my children's first day of school. Well, I picked them up and my daughter started talking about my husband and asking me details. My husband passed away in an accident, and she started asking me details. And I asked, why are we asking these questions today? And she said, well, everyone was talking about their families and introducing themselves. They started a new school, and they had to talk about the fact that their dad had died and they were the only ones. And it is a constant presence, regardless of the day of the week, or, you just don't know what the triggers are. There was one day at a park we were playing and one of my daughters became withdrawn. My friend was telling me, and my friend realized that she saw a bunch of dads playing with their kids, and my daughter got sad about that and just withdrew. So the triggers are, birthdays, it's anything, seemingly anything that seems normal because, their normal doesn't exist anymore. And you raised a good point about when you were in your teens, that it just felt like you couldn't bear that pain anymore. That's such an important time of life. And it's something that I'm already stressed about. My children are 9 years old now, but as they enter adolescence and hormones are already beginning to appear, I imagine that's an incredibly difficult, complex time.
Well, I'm going to say this. You're doing a fantastic job. And not that you need anyone to tell you that you're doing a great job as a mom, but you're doing a fantastic job, because what you're doing is you can't fix that. And if your daughter is seeing other young girls play with their father, that's real life, right? I mean, I did watch that my whole life. I watched, how many weddings was I a bridesmaid? And I did watch a beautiful event where the mother of the bride and my friend have this wonderful time together in the planning of it, in the execution of it. Kids are going away to college right now, moving into college dorms. And here at Empower, we know how painful that is for the surviving guardian, whether that's mom or dad. And the child going off to college is saying, well, I don't know how to explain to my new friends in my dorm that my mother died or that my father died, or why isn't my father moving me in? Those are real. And so I say, you're a beautiful mom. You're doing everything you need to do, and your kids have everything they need out of this experience being raised by you after an extraordinarily painful loss, because you're giving them open and honest communication about grief and loss. And I'll say again, I don't hold any ill will for this, but when my mother died, the pictures really just came down off the wall. My father was a gym teacher. I was raised on sports analogies, served me well. Like I told you, I needed love and support from my father. He told me he loved me every day. Dinner was on the table at 5 o'clock every day, no matter how physically and mentally exhausted he was in his own grief. And my father got me off to college, and my father, taught me how to play tennis when he didn't know how to even play the sport. And I became a Division I tennis athlete. He was an extraordinary father. He did everything he needed, but he wasn't responsible for teaching me how to grieve. And he couldn't take away that pain. He knew I was thinking high school graduation is going to be really hard without mom here. He knew I was thinking that, but we had no tools to talk to each other about that. And I wish I could cry on his shoulder about that. But think of how much complexity there is in that. If I start to cry to him, then he'll cry. And can I really bear that? Right? So again, it's why it takes a village. I hope every child of parent loss has more than just the surviving guardian to really rally around them and give them space to talk about it or not talk. I wasn't putting out any vibes that I wanted to talk about the death of my mother. And I'll leave you with a good story that really reflects more about your peers and about that support that can exist. When my mother died, a lot of my friends knew who my mother was, right? And as I mentioned, when my mother died, the pictures really came off the wall and we moved on. And that was survival. It was too painful to really sit around the dinner table and talk to my dad and my brother about my mom who died. And so I felt I shouldn't talk about her. I felt that I'd suck the air right out of the room if I talked in front of my friends in junior high school and even college. And so I really never talked about her or brought it up. We were in our 20s and all home, like my girlfriends from childhood, again, who a lot of them knew my mother. And I've been, my lifelines ever since. My girlfriends and I sat around, a bar stool and in our hometown and had the courage to ask me, why didn't you talk about your mother growing up? After she died, you never talked about her, Cara. Why? And I immediately thought, oh my God, I can't believe we're going to do this right now. This has been 15 years that we haven't done this. Okay, we're going to do this. And I said, well, why didn't you ask me about my mom growing up? I was desperate to talk about her. I wanted to tell you stories about her. I wanted to talk about it when I was sad. And they said, oh, no, absolutely not. That is not how this happened. You had a rule. And the rule was we were not allowed to bring her up. And I said, I'm really sorry. That was a mistake. I recognize that is what I did. I told all of you, you're not allowed to ask me about her. And she died, and that was a long time ago, and I'm fine. And I realize now what a mistake that was. My girlfriends were looking to build community for me. They were looking to give me support. And I was incapable of receiving it, and I was incapable of instructing them. And that's, again, what you're giving your girls. You're telling them, this is a place where we could talk openly about this. Now, today, tomorrow, whenever, or not for 6 months. I do know that some kids feel like I just need a break, but I'd say open and honest communication about grief and loss is the best that we can do for young people after the death of a parent. And if it can't be the surviving guardian that does it, because again, I'd give everyone a free pass, then maybe they can help build, supports around. And again, my way was giving that child a mentor, assigning a mentor, matching a mentor to that family. But if not, there are other creative ways that families can do that, because I believe the surviving guardian may run out of energy at the end of every day at school pickup. Maybe you were having a good day, and maybe you weren't really ready for that conversation after you already had an emotional morning with them going off to school. And so I just think that it takes a lot of different types of support and supports from a lot of different places to really create healthy, resilient, and happy children after, such traumatic loss.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I think, I echo that, as a conclusion, children are not resilient if they are left alone, and
Correct.
It does take community. I had a rule with my friends, and I said, let's continue talking about Doug, because some adults just don't mention the lost person because they feel bad or they believe it'll make you sad, but we can't erase them, and we shouldn't erase them, but we should do what's comfortable. We've kept up pictures and, in one place, and my children just recently, it's almost 2.5 years, they asked for daddy pillows. So they went through my phone and they picked out their favorite pictures of daddy, and we made pillows, and they sleep with them. And I'm having his shirts made into quilts for the girls. I finally got around to the closet 2.5 years later. But, we can't ignore children in the grief. You can't say they're resilient and then move on. And when there's a spouse grieving, there are children grieving too. And because they don't have the tools, resources, or maturity to do that on their own, they need some prompts. They need some additional help, and they need grace and patience from adults
Yes.
who don't understand how heavy grief hits, especially when it collides with normal childhood development and adolescence.
Yes. And they're not looking for attention. They're not attention seeking when there is, emotions that come out, especially we do talk, and this comes up quite a bit, when there are hormonal changes and when a child of early loss reaches puberty and when that sort of, tacks on. I don't think that children are acting out or looking for attention in sharing their grief. I think they're saying, I'm admitting I need help and I want help. And so, it's our job as adults to direct them to that or bring them to support. But yeah, nonetheless, it does complicate things when emotions come in. But as we say, it's not just the 5 stages of grief. There are missing stages in there. There is a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of pain. There's anger that come with an early loss. And the parent doesn't have to be an expert in it. The surviving parent doesn't have to be an expert in it. But, I encourage all parents to just really be okay asking for help. And, it's okay to ask for help and find other ways and other supports for their children. Because I believe, as you do, we say it very easily, it rolls off our tongue. Kids are resilient. It's been 2 years. I think that they're doing all right. It's not something they've forgotten about. It's really top of mind.
Yeah, always. Cara, thank you so much for joining me. I encourage viewers and listeners to reach out to Cara and her group Empower if you're on the East Coast. There are also other resources for children of grief. And I think that's really the big takeaway here. Please don't ignore the children. Children who have lost a parent early in life really need extra attention and constant attention because they have to live and navigate the rest of their life with this tattoo, as you mentioned, of loss that permanently changes who they ultimately feel they are and who they think they're going to become. Thank you, Cara.
Thank you.